begin this. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining me tonight. This is really exciting. There's lots of new people with us tonight, which is fantastic. I know that the load shedding has impacted on lots and lots of people. And it's really cool to be with you guys tonight. So thank you so much for joining me to talk about healing through pleasure. It's a really fascinating topic. So please close your eyes and take a breath in and slowly breathe out. And put your hand, both your hands on your heart center in the middle of your chest, really gently. And feel your hands on your heart center, and just let your hands relax onto the contours of your body. The curve of your chest, your breasts, your sternum. Just let your hand rest there. And feel the warmth of your hand on your heart center. As you breathe in, just get a sense of breathing into your heart center. And as you breathe out, you're breathing out from your heart center. Slow, deep breaths in and out. Each breath, become aware of the feeling, the sensation that's in your heart. Maybe there's a warmth, maybe a tingling, maybe simply the awareness of your heart. And as you breathe into your heart, become aware of the space in your heart. Become aware of the space in your heart. With each breath, have a sense of that space in your heart expanding. And the space in your heart expands to fill your body. And then let that space expand into the space around you, the space just around your body. Just be aware of how that feels. Allow that space around you to expand a little further outwards. With each breath, that space expands to fill the room that you're in. The city that you're in. Just imagine that space around you expanding around the world. Your heart expanding around the world. Just be aware of the feeling of that, the quality of that feeling. And slowly, slowly, come back to your body. Come back to your heart. Take a deep, deep breath in. And slowly open your eyes. Beautiful. So I'm very happy for anybody during this to ask questions. Type them into the chat box, unmute yourself, ask the questions, and we'll also have time at the end of this for questions. This idea has been around for a long time in the work that I do. So let's start with putting this in a context. Let me explain the framework of the work that I do. So we live and we work in terms of patterns. Everything that we do is a pattern. Our patterns are in our mind and our patterns are in our body. Most of our patterns are subconscious. We're not aware of them until we have some kind of problem. And then we kind of start looking and we start examining things. And then we become aware of the pattern, that everything that we do comes out of a pattern. The fact that the patterns are in our body is really, really important, because what that means is, regardless of what the mind wants to do in any given situation, our body is going to do what it knows how to do, what it's patterned to do. And I'm going to explain this very specifically, but let's just talk about the patterns first, because that's really important. Most of our patterns come from way back in the past. They come from family. They come from what we've seen, what we have heard. They come from stress. They come from trauma. Some of our patterns are generational, which means we are carrying stuff from way, way, way back. They're tribal, they're religious, and that's how we live. Generally, the patterns come from or manifest in three ways. They work, or we think they work, which is closer to the truth. They're what we know, and they're our comfort zone. The patterns that we live with have nothing to do with happiness. They have nothing to do with fulfillment. It simply is, that's how we live, because a big part of our mind is concerned with what it calls safety. And that safety means doing what we know and knowing what we do. So we go to the same kind of places, we eat the same kind of food, we read the same kind of books, we listen to the same kind of music, we wear the same kind of clothes, and we do the same kind of things. And in that, we find safety because we know it. That's all. We do what we know. And there's a really strong part of our brain that keeps us doing that. The way that the patterns form is when something stressful happens to us, we contract. That's our natural defense. We don't let go of that contraction. It stays there. And the next time something similar happens, and it just has to be similar, that's important. It just has to be similar, because that's the way the brain works. It works on recognizing similarities. So as soon as there's something similar, we contract again and again, and just become set as patterns that are based on stress, that are based on pain, that are based on trauma, that are based on limitation, that are based on inhibition. So most of our patterns are simply pain patterns. In terms of healing, there are two theories of healing, and every healing modality fits somewhere into this. The first is a theory that's based very much on the pain that we live with. So an easy way to understand this is, if you have a sore knee, all that you want is your knee fixed. So you'll go to the doctor, or you'll go to physio, or you'll go to acupuncture, or whatever you're going to do until your knee gets fixed. But the focus is the pain in your knee. Is the pain better? Is the pain better? Everything is compared to the pain. And that is just about fixing the pain. That's all that we want to do. So very often that's firstly like a band-aid, but secondly, it's very much simply focusing on the pain. The other model is about possibility. And it says, what could you do if your knee wasn't sore? So you could dance, you could go to yoga, you could get into all sorts of really cool sex positions, you could have fantastic shibari sessions, Japanese bondage, which gets you into some really interesting positions if your knee wasn't sore. It's about creating possibility. It's not ignoring the pain, it's not suppressing the pain, it's not pretending the issues are not there. It's saying that if we focus just on the issues and just on the problems, that's where we tend to get stuck and we kind of get locked into that. To understand this, we have to understand a little bit about energy. So everything in our world is energy, and all energy has frequency. Every color has a frequency. So your cameras are all off. But some of you got pictures there, but whatever color you're wearing, the frequency of that is all different. Every sound has a frequency. Every organ in the body has a range of optimal health. Anything above that or below that is not healthy. Every emotion has a frequency, and the frequency of emotion is the same in all of us. The triggers are different. So what makes you anxious is different to what makes me anxious, but the pattern of that is exactly the same. Everything that we do, everything that's been done to us falls into a frequency. It's a pattern. So energy is like a river. It needs to move. If it's not moving, behind where the water gets stuck, gets dirty and nasty and full of mosquitoes and all sorts of junk builds up there. Those become the points of blockage in our lives. Those become the dams in the river. So we get there, we don't know how to get past that. So we swirl around, we back off. We swirl around, we back off. And the pain theory is about getting past that. So we push. And the more we push, the more resistance there is. And the more resistance, the more we push. And the more we push, the more resistance. And then we get locked in this place. As soon as we can drop one of those, we can start to move. And then we can start to understand that that stream of blockage in this field of possibility that is our lives is just one possibility. And in any situation, it is almost unlimited what we could do. But because of the patterns and because of the perceptions that we have, which are patterns, we see things in a very narrow way. And because of that, we keep on doing the same thing. So from a relationship point of view, the analogy that I've been using lately is this. Because a lot of people who go through different relationships, even marriages, find out that they're doing pretty much the same thing again and again and again, and they're attracting the same kind of person. It's like a plug and a socket. If you have a 3-pin plug and a 3-pin socket, that's all that you can put in there. You can't put anything else in there. So we generally, in terms of relationship, we have one plug, we have one socket, and we attract the same kind of people. The package might be different. So the last woman was a tall blonde woman, and somebody comes along who's a shorter, skinny redhead, and I think, oh, this is going to be really different now. The package is different, that's all. energy, the pattern stays pretty much the same. When we start to expand, we see that there's a 2-pin plug, and there's a 1-pin plug, and there's a USB, and there's an HDMI, and there's all sorts of things. And we can start looking at possibilities. When we do that, that pain, that blockage that we were living with is just one possibility in this field. And we're not focusing on just that one. We're looking at what else could be there. And when we do that, and we start to expand, very often, that blockage, that narrow stream of pattern, starts to resolve and move. We start to understand it, but we're understanding it from a different perspective. Because when we shift the perspective, we can see something different. When we see it differently, we can do it differently. And that's very much the idea of expansion. And when we do the work of this journey, that's where the realizations about the patterns come to awareness. Because we're expanding something in our mind, we're expanding something in our bodies, we're looking at different beliefs, different perspectives, we're doing the practices in the body, practices of breathing, of body work, of all sorts of things. And that helps shift what's happening in our body. When that starts to move, we can see things differently. And I taught somebody something today. It's a really simple practice, but it's so effective. Somebody that I saw in my studio today. And we were talking about an issue that she's been looking at. And I said, why don't you do this? Write something on a piece of paper that's indicative, that's representative of this issue. Maybe it could be one line, it could be a sentence. You can even draw a little picture, it doesn't matter. You can draw a sigil, it doesn't matter, something that represents this. Put the piece of paper down and then walk around it. And every step you take, stop and look at it from a different perspective. And then lie on the floor and hold it above you and look at it, and put your head between your legs and look at it. When we do that, we're just shifting the perspective. And as soon as we do that, we can start to see something that's different. And the memory of how I actually came up with that practice just came to me. So every morning I used to do crossword puzzles in the newspaper. I love crossword puzzles, I love word puzzles. And there's one in one of our local newspapers that's a block of 9 letters. There's one letter in the middle, that's the big one. And you have to make words using the letter in the middle. And you have to make one word that has all the letters in it. And there are days where I would really struggle with this and struggle with it. And very often I would take the paper and I'd be sitting having coffee and I would just kind of throw it across the table. It would kind of turn over and land. And as it landed and it was in a different place, I saw something totally different. And from that, I started seeing that when we can shift that perspective, we can actually move quite a lot of things. So when we can shift perspective, we can change things. Okay. So where does the idea of pleasure come in terms of healing things? Think about the energy of pleasure. Think about how you feel when you are in pleasure. Not only sexual pleasure, but pleasure in life, full stop. When there's pleasure, you are lighter. Your body is lighter. There's more energy. You are happier. You flow more with life. Things are easier. You find more parking places easier. The shops have what you want. Everybody is nicer. More opportunities come up. You're more creative when there's pleasure and when we're in that space. When we're in the space of anger, of loneliness, of confusion, of despair, of rejection, all sorts of things like that, what happens is we're heavy and everything is difficult, and everything is hard, and everything is a struggle. And we keep on going round and round that in that space of blockage. Now, because a lot of our patterns are in our bodies, there's a saying, I think Caroline Myss was the one who said it. Our biology is our biography. Your body is your story. Everything that has happened to you is somewhere in your body. If that's the case, which it is, then so is the present in the body, and so is the future in the body. Because they're all represented here. So in our bodies, this energy tends to get blocked because of the contractions that we've had. So something stressful happens, we contract. That becomes a pattern in your body. So let's put this in a real example. Let's say a woman is not having orgasms. So lots of women come to see me because they're not having orgasms or they struggle to have orgasms. That's become a pattern in the body. Then there's a whole lot of reasons for that. There's a whole range of reasons for that. And that's unique to every single one of us. But your body is doing what it's been doing for so long. So you say, tonight is the night. Tonight's the night. And it's really going to happen. It's really going to happen. And everything's going to happen. And your body does what it's been doing. So you end up chasing this little orgasm all over the place, and it's nearly there, and it's nearly there. The pattern in your body keeps what you're doing happening. When we fill the body with pleasure through pleasure experiences, that starts to change because we're putting a different frequency in the body. And when we consciously connect that with the issues that we're working with, that starts to move, because in our bodies is the most amazing wisdom, the most amazing intelligence. And that intelligence directs this energy, uses it to change things. So when we work with the idea of healing through pleasure, if you have a series of pleasure experiences, because healing takes time, it doesn't happen in 5 minutes. Our patterns are deep, they're deeply set, they are complex. So the way that I work is I go deep with people, and that takes time. It's not quick fix, it's not the Band-Aid stuff. It's really about changing things. And it takes time for that to happen. We need to give ourselves the time to do that. When we take a healing journey, and if you had a range of pleasure experiences in this journey, so much changes because the frequency, the energy changes. We start to look at life differently. We start to look at relationships differently. We start to look at sex differently, at pleasure, at money, at governments, at all sorts of things. So things change. What makes it difficult for us is that we get so caught up in the issues that are happening and in the pain and the hurt and the stories of everything. And that's where we stay. And we kind of go round and round and round those. Now, of course, we resolve them. And of course, we clear stuff and we move through and we expand. Absolutely. And that's what a lot of the work is. And there are people on this who have done some work with me. Some people who are just starting. Some people who have been to workshops. And you guys understand, I think, that yes, we clear a lot. And yes, we need to look at some of the pain. There's no question of that. And when we focus on these pleasure experiences, we're putting a whole different energy into our body. We're putting a different frequency. And so much changes and heals from that. The focus of that becomes really interesting simply because we want to clear these issues that we have. And And so we want to understand them because the mind wants to understand them. And I want to know where it comes from and why am I doing this? And when I know why I'm doing it, then I'm going to stop doing it. And then I'm going to do something again, which by itself is actually quite an illusion. Just because you know why we do something does not mean we know how to not do it or how to do something else, how to do something differently. So that's its own little story. But we need the mind because it's really important, and it's a really important part of who we are. The more pleasure that we can put in our bodies, the more we can expand, the more we can change, the more we can heal. So from my point of view, and the work that I do, that comes through the body work, through working with sensual energy, through sexual energy, with a very clear intention. And this is really important because ultimately this is what makes it different. Pleasure for the sake of pleasure is fabulous. And I would never say don't have pleasure because it's really, really important. When we have pleasure with an intention, it's a very different kind of experience. It's about connecting with the body, connecting with that person and allowing that energy to flow. It's not about trying to make something happen. It's not about trying to make an orgasm happen. It's not about giving someone an orgasm. It's about building and moving that energy in the body. And sometimes orgasm is an incredibly important part of that. And sometimes it's not. The intention of it makes it very different. And we're bringing something to the body that is really different. Sex itself, penetrative sex, can be incredibly healing when it is conscious. To have a really conscious cock inside of you as a woman, even for a really short time, can be phenomenally healing. For a man to be welcomed and taken in by a really conscious woman, an incredibly conscious yoni, can be life-changing, because everything that we are is in that. Our heart is in our sex. Our mind, our soul, everything is in that. And that intention makes it a very different experience. So the more pleasure energy in our body that there is, conscious pleasure, the more so much can change and so much can heal. And it's kind of this balance between looking at the issues that we have, because of course we want to understand them, and yes, of course we want to work with them, and at the same time saying, if I just had these pleasure experiences, so much would heal and change. And it creates this really interesting perspective. Connection between epigenetics, trauma, and healing. Of course there is. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So when we have these conscious pleasure experiences, yoni massage, lingam massage, expanded orgasm, and from my perspective and in my world, there's not one yoni massage and there's not one lingam massage. And those of you who have been doing the webinars over the past weeks of lockdown and have been working with me over time understand, like a healing yoni massage is very different to a pleasure yoni massage. The intention is different, the focus is different, the movements, the technique, everything about it is different. The same thing last week on the lingam massage webinar. The first thing that we taught was called quiet lingam, or the water expression of lingam massage, which is all around the lingam, the perineum, the balls, the groin crease, and the lingam itself, but so softly and so slowly and so gently, and so much emotion comes up there. And in that space, so much healing happens. So the intention that we bring is very different. So the pleasure is very conscious pleasure, that we're fully present in that. Now this is where it gets interesting, because the definition of conscious sexuality that I work with is this: it's being fully present during sex and allowing whatever to arise to be there. That's important, because in that space of conscious pleasure, that's where the body will start to release what's sitting there. And in one way, Shanae, this is kind of a little bit of an answer to your question, which is this: that in that conscious pleasure, so much will come up for us to release, to feel, to experience, to let go of, to move through. So for example, there is a thing called a teargasm. A teargasm happens in really deep experiences where the power of the orgasm brings tears. And the first time I experienced this, I had no idea what was going on, and I thought, but what's this? It's like there's so much pleasure, and she just had this amazing orgasm, and that is all these, and I didn't understand it. And then I learned. And over time, I've seen that happen so much with men and with women. When we are willing to be so vulnerable, and that's one of the powers of pleasure, is in that vulnerability, we drop our armor, we drop our defenses, and we allow, and the energy of pleasure allows what's there to come to the surface and to be released. And when we do that with consciousness, with the intention, that's where so much can happen and so much can change. And so much awareness as well. Because one of the ways that our mind works is in terms of patterns and kind of thought loops, hamster wheels. They just go around and round and round. And this was probably about 18 months ago I had this experience. Maybe it was more or less. The days kind of all seem like a blur at the moment. Time is all the same. I got distracted for a second. Okay, I was doing yoga, and the yoga practice that I do is the Kaulu Tantra yoga practice, which is very slow, it's very deep, you do everything on the floor, there's a lot of breathing, you hold the postures for quite a long time. And for the first time ever, I was able to observe my thoughts for an hour and a half without getting drawn into them. Because very often we can observe our thoughts, but then we get kind of dragged into them. And for this, I was able to observe them without getting drawn in. And the way that they were shown to me were just these loops of white. It looked like canvas kind of going round and round. They were different shapes, and there was another one, but they were all these closed loops. And if you ever watch your thoughts, that's what they are. One goes to the next, and there are all these loops. We think in the same way, the same things, round and round and round. And when you become really conscious of your thoughts, you'll be amazed at how this happens. Anyway, it was the first time I was able to see all these thought loops. When we look at an issue that we have, we look at it from the same perspective that we hold. So we're trying to understand it from the same mind point that we've always been trying to understand it from. It's not going to tell us anything that it hasn't told us before. It's only when we shift the perspective that we have, or when we shift the energy, or when we look at it differently, or we feel it differently, or we sense it differently, that we can see it. And we can see it differently. It's kind of like the wood for the trees. You know, you're looking at this whole forest and you can't actually see any of the trees. You see the tree, but you don't see this whole forest. So we get stuck in that. When we're in this place of deep pleasure, one of the things that deep pleasure takes us to is an expanded state of consciousness. And what's quite interesting, one of the things that I that I teach and do as part of healing journeys. In a couple of weeks, we will do a webinar on this. Is called Expanded Orgasm. So I've called it Expanded Orgasmic Wave. And somebody wrote a PhD thesis on expanded orgasm, and they looked at the definition of states of consciousness. And expanded orgasm allows every one of those definition of expanded states of consciousness. So it's a tool, a technique, a technology, a philosophy, a practice that takes you to an expanded state of consciousness. That's where we really see things differently. And the one thing that deep pleasure brings is deep relaxation. And it's something that is so simple and so powerful. And I think on a lot of healing journeys, we kind of forget the power of relaxation. Because we hold on to so much, because there's so much contraction, because there's so much inner tension that we have. And the last couple of months have been stressful for everybody in some way. So the stress and tension has really been exacerbated. But what happens with all of that is in that space of deep relaxation, your body starts to let go. Your nervous system starts to let go. Your muscles start to let go. Your nerves start to let go. So energy that's been sitting there can actually move, and will only move in relaxation. The interesting thing about relaxation and pleasure is this. So for most of us, sex and orgasm are contractive experiences. So think about what happens when you get close to orgasm. Your muscles get tight, your breathing gets quick. Then you have this big explosion and you scream or shout, or if you're the quiet type, you just go, oh, that was nice. And that's all. In that space, all the sensation, all the energy that's building up in your pelvis and your genitals can't move. It has to stay there because of that contraction. As soon as you relax, it can flow through your body. And part of working with the energy of pleasure for healing is the deep relaxation, which allows that energy to move and to fill the body. And if you want that energy to move to different places, the body has to be relaxed to allow that movement. So in that space of pleasure is incredible, enormous, and deep healing. The mindset for a journey like that is really different. And it means that we have to be willing to put the issues, the problems, the things that we're looking at, we have to be willing to put them aside, to have these experiences, and then to come back to them. And we are amazed at how much changes when we do that. So what becomes interesting from my kind of personal point of view is the challenge of working with people who have all these issues and want them fixed. And that means looking at them and talking about them and dissecting them and pulling them apart and everything around that. And it takes time for us to be able to have a different mindset that says there is another way of doing this. And again, it's important to emphasize it's not ignoring any of these things. It's not suppressing them. It's not pretending that they're not there. It's acknowledging them deeply and fully. And saying that in the spectrum of healing and in the field of possibility, there are different ways to do things. And the energy of pleasure, our bodies, the energy of sensuality, our genitals, with literally millions of nerves devoted to the purpose of pleasure, are portals to these deeper energies within us, these deeper places within us. And there is so much more to sex than just orgasm and just pleasure. And just to digress for a little while here, in this, orgasm very often becomes a trap. So let me say this, because I need to put this disclaimer there every time we talk about this. Orgasms are wonderful. Orgasms are fabulous. I love orgasms. I love to come. In the field of pleasure, orgasm is but one possibility, and the way that most of us have orgasm often tends to limit the experience, and it almost becomes a trap because it keeps us from deeper pleasure experiences, because we focus on that orgasm. And when we do that, we do whatever it is that we need to do to make that happen. So whatever the thoughts, the feelings, the fantasies, the stimulation, whatever it is that we need to do, that's where we go. And that's what we focus on. When we take ourselves out of that, we get so much more into that place of pleasure. And that's where the energy of pleasure really starts to move through us, where we can access and use that energy. So in a few weeks, for example, when we do an expanded orgasm webinar, that I will teach you how to do expanded orgasm on a man, on a woman, and on yourself. One of the most amazing expressions of expanded orgasm is the healing that comes from it. And that's in that space of really deep relaxation. So I think in a big nutshell, that's my understanding of healing through pleasure. And it's interesting because I've been talking to people about it all week that I've been working with online and in my studio. And it's been a really different discussion every single time. So what do you guys think about that? How does it feel? Does it resonate? Does it make some sense? What do you think about it? Put something in the chat box. Put unmute yourself. Here's an interesting question from someone. When I get focused on work and projects during the day, my libido disappears. Well, of course it does, because you're focused on one thing. What does become important in that is that when that work is done, to take the energy from the work and put it into your body and into your sexuality and into your sensuality. So sometimes some kind of ritual is really good from that, something in your body that actually says, okay, there's been all this energy in my head, and now I'm going to kind of draw it down into my yoni. I'm going to draw it into my lingam. I'm going to draw it into my sexual center. I'm going to do some breathing. I'm going to do some dancing. I'm going to make some sexual noises. I'm going to touch myself. I'm going to bring that energy consciously into my body. And that'll be one way to work with that. I hope that that's helpful. Always feel frustrated when getting into intimacy, as the man will jump into the sexually stimulating areas rather than the whole body. Yeah, that's an absolute big one. Because for most of us, sex is genital. And for men more than women, it's so genitally focused. And as soon as that genital focus is there, that's where we go. And then we forget about the energy. So that's where very often the sensual experiences, the rituals of connecting or breathing, yab yum breathing, for example. So yab yum is one of the most classic tantric lovemaking positions. Yab yum means ultimate union. It's called yab yum because it's so yummy. It really is yummy, but it means ultimate union because your energy centers are aligned. So the classic way that yab yum is done is that I would sit cross-legged and my partner would sit on my lap with her legs around me. And that aligns all of our energy centers, the chakras. And it's a beautiful, beautiful position for lovemaking, but a beautiful position just to sit with your partner and breathe. So when you do that before some kind of before penetration, when you do heart salutation and dancing hands and all of these things, that's where so much starts to change with that. And a lot of that is communication. You really have to create experiences with your lover. You know, it's almost like writing or following a recipe. You have to sit down and say, so if we want to have a different experience, we have to do something different. And that means we actually have to know what we're doing. So we need to create the experience. The idea that it's all going to happen spontaneously is, that's struggle for the word here. Often it's absurd because it's not going to happen in the way that we would like it until we sit down and say, okay, this is what I would like to happen tonight. And to have that experience, this is what we need to do to make that happen. And it's only really with communication that we create that with our partners. This is interesting. Okay, the difference between yoni massage for pleasure and yoni massage for healing. So again, there's not just one healing yoni massage. Let me give you an example. A yoni massage that's for pleasure is going to be about building pleasure. It might take someone to an orgasm. That's not the intention, or certainly not my intention with yoni massage. But the experience of that is pleasure. And along the way for that, the touch might be, it'll start out really slowly, really gently. At some point in that, it's going to get faster, it's going to get harder, because that's building that fire of pleasure. And even though that's not the only way, that's very often one expression of that. So for healing, for example, the tissues of the yoni, particularly the G-spot, hold a lot of hurt from the past. They hold tension, so points that should be alive and awake and sensitive are numb or tender or even painful because of emotions that sit there. Negative experiences, traumatic experiences, beliefs about sex. When a woman was touched in a way that wasn't loving and honoring, when she had sex and she didn't want to have sex, when she had sex that wasn't fulfilling, when she was penetrated before she was ready, when there wasn't enough lube, all sorts of things like that sit in the tissues of the yoni. Beliefs about sex, about pleasure, about her body, all sorts of patterns and conditioning. So when you're working with the healing of that, the release of that is really slow, it's really gentle. You could be holding one point and doing a visualization process with that for 40 minutes to release that. So the experiences are very different. What if you focus on the pleasure and bury the pain, but have the pain pop up at some random time? Yeah, the pain is going to pop up at some random time, whatever that is. The point in this is not burying the pain. It's not ignoring it. It's not suppressing it. It's knowing that it's there and it's allowing it to come to be released. And that can happen in a state of pleasure and in a state of conscious pleasure. And yes, there are times where we need to look at these issues, absolutely. And this is kind of the fine balance, because when they come up, that's the opportunity to work with them. That's the opportunity to look at them, but not to get stuck in just releasing the pain and not holding on to the pain. That's really important. Our nature is to hold on. Our biological nature is to hold on. From the moment we're born, we cling to life. And I've had the amazing privilege, and it's an incredible privilege, of watching quite a few people leave this earth journey. And the way that the body clings to life, when the soul is ready, it's like time. This is the body clings to life. So we hold on. So we want to hold on to the pleasure and we want to hold on to the pain because we know it. And when we work more with pleasure, we understand more about energy moving. So we don't hold on to the anger and we don't hold on to the joy either. We don't hold on to the ecstasy. We don't hold on to the bliss. We allow it to move. So in a state of conscious pleasure, when something comes up, we feel it to the fullness of what it is. We savor it. and it moves. I hope that answers that, Soraya. If not, tell me and I will talk more about it. Reminded me again how important the need for deep relaxation when approaching a healing. Yeah, absolutely, James. That is so important. It's huge. It makes such a difference. So it's definitely not burying the pain. It's absolutely allowing it to be there. And understanding that in healing the pain, whatever that means, and that is quite at the moment, I really kind of struggle with the word healing as such, but that's my own little story. I got distracted from what I was going to say. When we allow something to be there, when we feel it to the fullness of it, we understand that there is not just one way through it. There's not just one way to release it. And when we can add pleasure to that, we're adding an energy that can help us expand that, create a different space for that, a different perspective that can help move that. I hope that makes some sense. The interesting thing about so much of this is that it's really experiential. It's one of those things. It's like you can talk about classical Tantra forever. You can talk about Neo-Tantra forever. You can talk about Taoist experiences forever. You can talk about expanded orgasm forever. And it's only in the experience that we really get it. Otherwise, it's just in the mind. And that becomes the limitation. Okay. What does everybody feel about this? What does everybody think about this? So I'm presuming then that everybody is in deep thought, seeing nobody is saying anything. So I thank you all for being with me tonight. I have really enjoyed this and learned things, which is really beautiful for me. Next week, we are doing another webinar that is free. I have no idea what we're talking about yet next week. So anybody got any ideas? I'm very open to them. We can do some Q&A, but something will come up as it always does. The possibility of exploring some other means of pleasure that might be a distraction from the long-held pain. No, you don't want to distract anything. Yeah, it will move that pain once something new is there, once the thing has been expanded. But it's not about distraction, because distraction takes us away from feeling. And this is really important. We want to be in the feeling. We want to know what it is, what's happening. It's one of the most important principles of Tantra. Be with what is. So when it's there, we don't want to distract from it. We want it to be there and understand that there are ways to move that. And pleasure is a really powerful path for that. That's important. So thank you again, everybody. If you have any other questions, please email me. There's lots of people here that I don't know, so please go to my website, eroslife.co.za. Subscribe to the newsletter there. There's some really interesting stuff there. On my Facebook page, I post lots of things, so please follow that. On Instagram as well. And any questions that you have, please message or email me. And in the next day or so, please drop a message, an email or something, how you experienced this tonight. So again, I thank you so much. I hope that you keep warm, and I wish you so much pleasure.